Our story begins with an explosion in the academy, the main character falling to the ground, and one of the people mockingly told him that he didn't notice him there. A guy with green hair asked him if even such an elementary spell could really hit him, and added that it was amazing. Arta got up with difficulty and pain when he became satisfied with this, so that they would return what they had taken away from him. A signature dish from the canteen, a fresh sirloin burger. There are only 50 of them. The guys mocking him, and 044, saying that there are a lot of people here who want to try this. Anisha green hair adds, and there is no drink here at all. About others not you think. Because of this he reads that heart is worth punishing. He releases the ball from his hand towards our main character. This blow again knocked him to the ground. He stood while the guys mockingly told him that as they expected he was exceptionally weak. Suddenly one girl furiously burst into their conversation. Guys noticed that this was the bus of Anoma from the disciplinary committee and immediately realized, 128, that things were bad. After that, one of these guys threw his phone in Hart's face, as a result of which the phone fell to the ground and broke. The tire of Anoma rushed to him and worriedly asked if he was okay, but he said she should stop and that she would also be excluded if she communicated with her. She said sadly that it didn't matter to her, 157, but he angrily told her that they could survive in this place, but he would behave like in childhood. Then he found leaving her sad alone. Entered the building where the students were whispering that he was a special admission student. They were asking how they managed to get into such a prestigious school when he had zero magical ability. They were also talking about hearing errors in the grading system and wondering if he had been substituted in the exam. Although Hart was not wants to admit it, but he cannot deny the rumors. Asked with a question how a 239 student fails in time, how he himself got into this prestigious school. One day suddenly his parents announced my admission as a special student, and even if he wanted to ask them why was it already late, he looked at the sky and I thought maybe he should have died with him that day. Harta was accepted into the school with zero magical ability, so he could not study at the Faculty of Magic. He was forced to become a swordsman, and in a modern society where magic predominates, he was considered useless, capable only of 317, close combat, being the only survivor in his family and a constant trouble in the dungeons. He was nicknamed the Plague God. After class, he returned to his apartment and opened the door. But before entering, he noticed a letter on the door. He sat down holding the letter and noticed that it did not have a stamp of the sender's name. But he decided to open it. When he tore off the sticker, he was surprised that a powerful light came from the letter which enveloped him while he was in shock, and in the end the letter pulled him. 351. Inside, opening his eyes, he found that his surroundings had become bright, which made him anxiously ask where he was. Water on which O stepped on dispersed, and a shadow appeared who smiled, telling him that now is 2054 according to the Western calendar, and asked if he was really a 16-year-old Kujo Harto, to which he stuttered in the affirmative. The shadow said that the name is Harto and that he is his future I. He explained that he had sent a letter from the future and that in 10 years he will become a magician capable of manipulating, for 36. Space and time. However, waiting that long was too much, so he decided to train him right now to become a great magician of space and time. Harta looked at the shadow, not understanding what he was saying. His future I told him that he insisted that a picture is worth 1,000 words and asked him to just do once what he says, to enter the dungeon of Friend Garden of Shinjuku alone, and said that he would talk to him again when he did that. Those worms in his mouth did not disappear and he entered from Shinjuku, 522. Dungeon NGF. He knew that this was already the beginning of the dungeon, and it didn't really contain anything for itself. After that he told his future and I that this was some kind of joke. He should know that this would happen. His future I replied that he could burn and tear up the letter as he like it, and told him to go straight and turn straight at the end. Clenching his teeth in irritation, he followed the punishment, and through pus he found himself in front of the wall. He told his future that he had reached a dead end and asked if it was possible to burn him now, but his future simply told him to insert the letter into the crack in the wall. He sighed, inserted the letter into the crack. To his surprise, it shone and the wall moved apart, creating enough space for him to pass. He walked inside, having never heard of it, and he saw a huge crystal connected by a chain. His future told him that it was a skill stone, and asked C's whether he was her for the first time, and then his future self told him to touch him and get the skill. He, 648, came closer to the sopas and touched him, but then his future self apologized to him. Suddenly the Ming stone crack turned red, then a purple light aura appeared around him, and opened above him a hole that began to suck in everything around her, and formed something in the air. When she finished sucking in everything around her at high speed and formed an object, the smoke gradually cleared, revealing a huge form in front of him. And then the golem jumped closer to him. He looked at him with his bright eyes and 737. I wondered if this was really a golem. But then it attacked him, quickly hitting him and throwing him to the side. He flew to the side and received a serious injury. He was drowning in his thoughts about what was happening. I was deceived. He felt the heat and understood that it was burning. 803. He noticed that his consciousness was fading and wondered whether will he die. He looked at the phone, seeing a picture of his mother, father, and little sister, and told them that he could finally be with them. But then the letter lit up his future. I asked him if everything was okay. O reminded him that he was a failure at school, who his parents wrote him down, and that he would die a senseless death having been deceived. 837. Then he asked him if he was really satisfied with this, what brought him to his senses. He remembered his unhappy life, and where nothing good ever happened. However, he realized that it was just his life, and he convinced himself that this is how it should be. So he gave up. He replied that no, this does not suit him, and the letter told him that if this is so, he must resist and survive and change his miserable life. When the golem's attack was on the verge of hitting him, he did not dodge and was killed, but even so did not give up and thought, 918, that he would not allow himself to be broken in such a place. Suddenly the cyst showed Sanku's wounds hidden from the dungeon, and he fulfilled the requirement to receive the indomitable spirit of the mage of space and time. Thus his death was cancelled. His physical body was subjected to a rollback. He opened his eyes, confident that he would survive. When he fulfilled the requirements, the skill stone shattered into pieces, releasing a powerful force directed straight to the place where he lay, and in an instant his body was filled with the power of electrical energy. The system showed that he acquired the magic of space-time as well as the ability to quickly restore the body, rewind and stop the chain. It also indicated that he received a passive to the Mage of Space and Time of the first level awakening potential with an increase of 30%. However, he just looked at his hand and asked what the hell this was. His future I explained that awakening required potentially lethal conditions. His future I apologized for not telling him in advance, but it turned out that the magic of space and time would not be discovered for another 10 years because it was part of a hidden quest that so far no one has passed except him. Our main character asked if he was really from the future, but his future I just said that he now looks alive and that the training will begin now. The golem behind him was ready to start an attack. He felt it and immediately looked back, managed to dodge in time golem hands. Then he noticed that his body seemed so light, wondering if this was the effect of his passive skill. I will tell him that she is teaching him how a space and time mage should fight, and that he should not use his eyes to see but simply feel the flow of time which rules the world. He followed the order, and his future self proudly told him that he can do this because he is he. In the end, the golem launched its huge fist at him, but he did not move and tried to concentrate, feeling the flow of time when the golem's core was in Yuma from it. He opened his eyes, looking at the eyes of the golem, and managed to dodge in time. Then he activated his magic of space and time using his speed. He found himself on the golem's hand and began to climb up his body, and when he got to the very top he stabbed his golem's head, telling him that this must be his core. Gradually the golem's head began to crack until it exploded and crumbled into pieces. He descended to the ground and left while the golem's body was destroyed behind him. Having defeated the golem, his level increased by 4 orders of magnitude. His swordsmanship skills increased and he received 45.00 credits. Looking at system, his future asked him if he believed now and called him the god of Chima. He squeezed the sword tightly and answered that to some extent yes. His future, and then told him what was the necessary step. He must leave the dungeon. He asked his future self if anything else what needs to be done. What is his future? I answered in the affirmative that only one small change needs to be made. They gathered there where Shinoa will be killed by a monster today. He stopped after hearing this and was shocked when he realized what was said. But then he asked his future to repeat what he said. His future I explained that it was about his childhood friend Shino Gnome who, along with some friends, will enter the rank dungeon today. and will be killed by an additional boss calling on him to save Shino Gnome and change the future. His future. I then called him a space and time mage when he ran out dungeons while he was running his future. I told him that on May 23, 2054, according to the Western calendar. The deepest part of the dungeon Randy party mates Rem's saving spell. There were no other adventurers there, and therefore would not be completely destroyed. Although the bus was not entirely Rem's fault. Future. I could say more. He shouted to shut up in a moment. He arrived in a replacement with Future. Why didn't she say anything earlier? Future. I just asked him in response if he wanted to avoid communicating with anyone. Adam. That everyone with KM he entered in contact met misfortune. She reminded them that this is also the reason why it was quite comfortable to be rejected, and asked him why he was so angry for a moment when he was surrounded by goblins for his future. I told him to stop leading Sita. As if he had suddenly seen the light, he pulled out his sword from behind, and when the goblins simultaneously jumped to attack him, he cut them down. His future told him that the world can be changed by his actions, but he just told his future me to shut up and in that he will do whatever his future wants. I replied that I understood and that this is the answer which she was looking for, and as a reward she would teach him how to use the magic of space and time. Meanwhile, in the deepest area of the dungeon, a huge explosion was heard along with screams, and the tire was thrown back into the air. She hit the ground while her friends looked in. They excitedly called her name, but she could get up because of the pain. Opening her eyes, she saw in front of her an additional boss of the Dark Guard rank. The guys screamed that they were not warned about this, and the women who tried to call for help in a panic screamed that it was useless because the salvation spell did not work. The other girl called on them to calm down, and said that if they all attack at the same time they have a chance of victory, but the guy answered stutteringly that he cannot and does not want to die. The Dark Guardian lit his huge sword while the girl shouted at the guy that now is not the time to say such things, but then the Dark Guardian swung his sword at their side and the blow hit everyone, threw the tire into the air. Just came to herself and was shocked to see that all her friends were lying on the ground. Many were unconscious. But then she noticed that one of her friends was still alive and begged for help. She made Sei stand up and attack the Dark Guard with her fire magic. She managed to hit him in the head, but it didn't even scratch the guard, leaving her in horror. The Dark Guard raised the sword, and when he began to strike with the sword, she closed her eyes in tears and screamed in horror that someone had helped. Fortunately, he appeared just in time. He used his skill chain stop to stop the attack of the Dark Guard. Then he asked her if she was okay. She opened her eyes, glazed from the sword of the Dark Guard. Then he jumped behind him, and when the Guardian quickly turned around to attack him again, he blocked her attack with his sword and hit him in the stomach, knowing that this was a weak point. But his attack was simply blocked by the guard's armor, and he realized that it was too strong. The Dark Guard launched another attack, which he blocked with his sword and tried his best to cope with it. Unfortunately, his arm cracked under hit and broke in half. The Dark Guardian stared at him in rage, making him realize that he was doing something bad. Then the Guardian gathered his power and directed it at him, releasing powerful energy that caused an explosion, and using his skill fast body and time magic. He escaped and ended up behind the guard. Realizes that the sword will not work on armor. It is not effective on protected parts. He realized that he needs to focus on the head. The Dark Guard turned and he immediately launched the elephant's sword at his head. His future reminded him that the sword would break, but he simply replied that he knew. Then he used his rewind skill time, and while her sword was being restored, he again launched it into the head of the guard, who again collected power. The tip of the sword held the gallus of the Dark Guard and destroyed the head of the Dark Guard, thereby completely dealing with his future. I then told him that it seemed that he had changed fate itself, while Shina Noma looked at him in shock and confusion. After a moment, Shina Nomi rushed towards him asking what was even going on, and screaming for him to explain, but first decided to thank her for saving her and her friends. He said not to worry about it, and asked her to keep it in. Duman asked us in a moment if this meant that it would be a secret only between them. He sheepishly replied yes, that it would be exactly like that. She smiled upon hearing this, and then asked him what the source of his power was. He was going to answer when his future I told him that it wants to minimize the branching of future paths and refrain from making any cautious comments about the magic of space and time. He stopped after hearing his future self but asked Nomi to keep what he was going to tell her a secret. She looked at him confused, but she explained that he didn't want to stand out about his future. I then suggested that he somehow deceive her. But I heard and asked if this voice was his. He replied that it was not him and that he did not know what she was talking about. Otherwise, he looked angrily at the future to her, and said, "Then I will finish you off." He sighed and told Noma that he wanted to try a special sword skill that he had been training for a very long time. But since it is not finished yet, this isn't something that can be told to everyone, she answered with a smile that she understood. If this is so, then she will keep it a secret. After which he sighed with relief, knowing that he somehow managed to deceive her. Thus the inevitable death of Shin Noma was averted, and at the same time Haruto was able to gain magic suppressing power. Haruto knew that he cannot change the past, but he can continue to change what is still standing. Suddenly someone then he called him the god of plague, and when he turned around he saw that there was a guy standing there who was teasing him and laughing at him through the novel. One guy told him that he heard that he was in the dungeon yesterday and that some guy who accidentally saw her said that he just ran home powerless, unable to help in any way. The other guy mockingly said that it seems they even encountered an additional boss and had to go through with him, which made them laugh and did not ask his friends. No, Ali was expected from God then what, but Hato was just thinking who was the witness besides Noma. Aaron then told him that it was his friend who was also there and was eventually taken to the hospital with serious injuries. So the hospitalization costs would be significant. Then he pointed to the money and asked Leon to understand what he meant by Adam. He demanded that he pay, and in a moment he won't tell anyone about this. Aaron asked him what he would say, but he remained silent, which angered them and prompted them to demand her to say something. But without waiting for an answer, he summoned fire in his hand and reminded him that he was their target for practicing attack spells again, to which he replied, "To hell, let's go to hell. The ___ scum that's in earnest kicked out the village of hooligans." They began to attack her in anger, calling him a bastard, but he was grateful for the increase in his characteristics since now he could clearly see the movement of these scumbags. He quickly attacked them with one after another. He quickly dealt with the VM, finding himself behind them. They all looked back in horror, not understanding what was happening. He told him to remember well and warned them not to approach him again. Otherwise the same thing would happen to them. He held their wallets and a lighter. One of the men shouted that it was theirs wallets, but he just lit a lighter and told them that this was a promise between them. Then he seriously asked if they understood each other, to which they all nodded in fear. After that, they all ran away. He thought that they would not touch him anymore and decided to return to class instantly. Later, sitting in class, he noticed that the next fate would be by measuring the magical capacity. The teacher announced that they would immediately begin measuring the magical capacity of this semester and called him by name. He replied, "I gave it to him to go forward." He knew that his inner magical power of space and time. He decided to try to pour some space and time magic into the mirror. As a test, he put his hand on the mirror and filled it with his space and time magic. After that, he opened his eyes and the teacher was stunned. It exploded and shattered into pieces, making the teacher fall to the floor and leaving the student in shock. He realized that there was no need to do something so dramatic because it brought unnecessary attention to him. While in the background, Shino no Mihika after school, as he was leaving the building, he heard students whispering, asking if he was the plague god who destroyed the measuring device. They muttered that further research showed that it was a form of unknown magic, but the other students couldn't believe it, knowing that if it was true, yes, he would be higher in rank. Hey, he thought about how different these rumors were from the ones he had heard before and felt that it was much more tiringly. Suddenly someone called out to him, and he looked around, confused. The voice then called her into the bushes, and what appeared made him surprised. Lucia, the toy, spoke to him, and he recognized the voice. Asked if it was him from the letter and what happened to his form future. I replied that it was a type of space and time magic that was in possession of a plush toy. He asked his future self to explain everything, but his future only stated that it was an emergency since the Chaos Dragon appeared earlier than the future that he knew. He asked his future self what he means by the Chaos Dragon. His future explained that the Chaos Dragon was bad news because he had destroyed the GG adventurer in the Arik region, which led to numerous casualties. It also caused an unprecedented disaster and was a monster classified as a target for Alpha-type destruction. His future emphasized that since the dragon appeared earlier than expected, they must defeat him, no matter what happens to Tony. He told his future self that if they do this, disasters will happen again, to which his future agreed, saying that everything is the same as in his future. He is shocked by the revelation. He screamed to his future self that in this case they should contact the Adventurer's Guide and request a destruction team because with a squad of high-level fighters, even a chaos dragon would be much easier to deal with alone. I just looked around. Stating that time Glass suddenly did not hear that something was massively approaching from above, and when he looked up he was stunned. Future, I shouldn't the dragon be locked in the dungeon? But her future replied that it was a ferocious and migratory species that was unlikely to stay in one place. When the dragon flew past them he cursed in panic, knowing what if he continued the way the school will suffer, and there will be many victims. Students, who were peacefully leaving the school and talking cheerfully, stopped abruptly as darkness enveloped their surroundings, did not look up in horror at the dragon flying above them, stand still in shock and asking why he was there. The dragon looked at them from above and rushed towards the earth. Having put their fears to rest, run back to the safety of the school building. The woman screamed for everyone to prepare for battle and ordered the non-mage students to urgently evacuate to the school dormitory while the mages took their positions. Meanwhile, our main character ran after the dragon, shouting that there was a magical student guard ahead of the students' council. The students formed a magic circle and aimed it at the dragon hovering above them. They began to attack the dragon with their magical powers, and the woman in front raised her staff, orders her team to keep the dragon out of the school grounds. Then she created a huge magic circle above the dragon and delivered a crushing attack that caused her team to explode. Proudly thought that they had shortened the dragon, and she smiled, but her smile turned into shock when he heard the dragon roar furiously. To their horror, they realized that their attacks had no effect since the dragon was immune against them. At that moment, the dragon gathered its power and released a destructive explosion towards the student council mage. The attack hit them straight, leaving no time to escape, and caused a huge resolution on Earth. On the eyes fault the student council mage's guard was destroyed. His future I commented that this was to be expected since they were just mage students. He shouted at his future self that now is not the time for such remarks. But his future simply called him by name, and before he could look back, something threw at his head. He asked his future what he was doing and received the answer that it was a dragon, not an incense aroma that attracts dragons. His future I explained that the dragon Butchie is a ferocious migratory species with low intelligence, will now pursue only him. Then the dragon spies him, are ready to attack, but his future strictly told him that he must face him and show them the power of the mage of space and time. Well, that's it for this. The series is coming to an end, and if you want to see the continuation as soon as possible, then subscribe to my Telegram channel. There are announcements of videos and a lot of interesting things. Also subscribe to Boost as soon as all the continuations will be released there. Well, Kirill was with you. Good luck and see you soon. Meetings.